Her body was located just over an embankment, just sort of at the top of an embankment. She had been stabbed so many times.
I hate you. You're gonna die. I don't want to do this.
All of the blood had been drained, and she was so pallid and pale that it was very clear that there were gaping holes of her skin that had been sliced open. This was absolutely a targeted murder because of the number of stab wounds that were on her body. It wasn't just, I want her dead, I want her beyond dead.
But the pressing questions were, who could be desperate enough to commit such a gruesome act in the middle of the highway? And why?
On January 29, 2008, Latrese Curtis told her husband she was going to study at the library of her university, but she never came home. The next morning, Darin drove past a crime scene on I-540, his stomach dropping when he spotted her car. Desperate, he ran toward the flashing lights, expecting an accident. Instead, he found a nightmare. Latrese had been slaughtered multiple times, her body discarded like trash. But the truth behind her murder would send shockwaves through the community, leading police to an unthinkable suspect, a pastor. And disturbingly, hers wasn't the only life taken by a pastor in the name of reputation. Let's get into it. Latrese Curtis was a bright 21-year-old college student from Raleigh, North Carolina. She had her whole life ahead of her. Smart, ambitious, and well-liked, she was making moves at Wake Tech Community College when she met Darin Lee Curtis. They hit it off fast, and before anyone could blink, they had eloped and tied the knot in 2007. But here's the thing, marriage isn't easy, especially when you're young and juggling school, work, and a relationship all at once. The cracks started to show, and before long, their once happy marriage was falling apart. And then came the unthinkable. On January 30th, 2008, a motorist driving along Interstate 540 spotted something horrifying. Latrese's body lying on the roadside. She hadn't just been murdered, she had been brutalized. Knifed nearly 40 times in the head, neck, chest, and stomach, and hit so hard on the back of the head that it was clear this was personal. This wasn't just an attack, it was rage.
This was absolutely a targeted murder because of the number of stab wounds that were on her body. It wasn't just, I want her dead, I want her beyond dead.
Naturally, the police turned to Darin first. He told them the last time he spoke to Latrese was around 10 p.m. the night before, when she was leaving the library to head home. He claimed he went to bed around 11 p.m., then woke up the next morning to find her missing. His calls went straight to voicemail. Then, while driving to work, he spotted her car, and that's when he saw something chilling. Red stains on the steering wheel. Panicked, he called 911 to report her missing, not knowing he was about...
All right, it's early in the game. Do y'all think it was the husband? Comment below.
To walk straight into a crime scene.
I showed him the picture. I said, "This is my wife versus her car up there. Is that tell me that's not her under that tar?"
Darin cooperated with the police without hesitation. He gave DNA samples, fingerprints, and let them photograph him. But here's where things got interesting. Latrese had been so many times that her attacker was likely injured in the struggle. Yet Darin, not a single scratch on him. That raised questions, but also pushed investigators to look elsewhere. That's when they dug into Latrese's phone records. One number stood out. She had been in contact with it multiple times near the time of her death. The number belonged to Stephen Randolph, a classmate at Wake Tech. When police reached out to Stephen, he agreed to come in, but only if he could bring someone with him. That person, a local pastor named Robert Lee Adam Reeves. Now, this wasn't just any pastor. He was also Stephen's mentor and roommate. Stephen met Pastor Reeves while working at a car wash, struggling with money and barely scraping by. Reeves, seeing a young man in need, took him in and offered him a basement room for $300 a month. It seemed like a good situation. Finally, Stephen had a stable place to stay and could focus on school and basketball, but things weren't as simple as they seemed. And then Stephen dropped a bombshell. During his police interview on February 1st, 2008, he admitted that he and Latrese had been involved. She had told him she was separated from her husband, and the two had gotten close. The last time he saw her, the night of January 29th, according to him, they had spent some time together, got intimate, and then she left around 10 p.m. But here's where things took a turn. Stephen confessed that after Latrese left, he went to see his girlfriend. Yep, you heard that right. He had another woman. So now the question was he just a guy playing the field, or was there something much darker at play? Investigators weren't done yet. They needed more answers, so they decided decided to question Pastor Robert separately, and he didn't hold back. According to him, Stephen had a habit of bringing women over, though the pastor didn't approve. He also mentioned something interesting. When he got home from church that night, he saw a white car parked outside. He recognized it as Latrese's because he'd seen her before. He wasn't sure when she left, but he did see Stephen head out later that night. By now, police had a timeline of Latrese's final hours, but they were still missing the key piece. They confirmed Stephen's alibi with his girlfriend who, while shocked to learn he was cheating, backed up his story. He had been with her until 1 a.m., but then she revealed something. She and Stephen had been getting threatening calls from a blocked number. The message was always the same. Stephen needed to stop what he was doing, or he'd get his legs broken, ending his NBA dreams.
Okay, who
Then,
was that?
one night after a call, their tires were slashed. This new information turned investigators' attention right back to Darin. If Latrese had been planning to leave him, it would make sense for her husband to try and scare her lover off, but they needed proof. With search warrants in hand, police combed through both Darin and Stephen's homes, vehicles, and even took DNA samples. Darin's search came up clean. Stephen's? Not so much. Outside the house, police found a minivan in the driveway. It was registered to Pastor Reeves, but what really caught their attention was something alarming. A citation on the van from the night of Latrese's murder. Turns out, at 1:30 a.m., a state trooper had found the van abandoned on the side of Interstate 540. Its hazard lights were on, the windows were down, even though it was raining, and the keys were still in the ignition. No driver in sight. And then there was more. The trooper also remembered seeing another white car with its hazards on that night, but before he could check it out, he got called away on an urgent matter. Later, investigators pinpointed exactly where the minivan and that white car had been spotted, and it was right where Latrese's body was found. It became painfully clear, if the trooper hadn't been called away, he might have walked in on the murder as it was happening. With this new lead, officers brought Pastor Robert Reeves in for questioning. The moment they confronted him, a look of sheer terror flashed across his face. But then, he tried to play it cool, claiming he had no idea how his van ended up at the crime scene.
We got a whole lot of suspects in this one.
He insisted Stephen had access to his keys and had been using the vehicle after his tires got slashed. But the police weren't buying it. A fingerprint inside Latrese's car sealed the deal. On February 2, 2008, Pastor Robert Reeves was arrested, but it didn't make any sense why he would want Latrese dead. And that's when the real truth about him started to unravel. A background check revealed he wasn't just a pastor, he was a predator. His criminal history showed a disturbing pattern. He preyed on young boys at his churches, and whenever he got caught, he simply moved to a different area to start again. Then, investigators subpoenaed his phone records, and what they found was damning. Reeves had 3 different phone numbers registered to him. One of them matched the exact times when Stephen and his girlfriend had received those threatening calls. But that wasn't all. DNA from Latrese's car came back as a match to Reeves, and when officers took a closer look at him, they noticed fresh cuts and wounds on his arms. He brushed it off, claiming he got them while moving furniture, but that turned out to be a lie. And then, Stephen dropped a bombshell. He told investigators that when he first moved in with Reeves, the pastor had made multiple unwanted advances toward him. Stephen rejected him every time, but Reeves wouldn't stop. It got so bad that Stephen borrowed a gun from his cousin and kept it under his pillow in the basement, just in case. And he made it very clear to Reeves that he wasn't interested. But the final nail in the coffin? Stephen explained how the alarm system at Reeves's house worked. Each person had their own code. When officers checked the alarm records, they found that Stephen's code had been used to disarm the system at 1:30 a.m. But an hour later, at 2:30 a.m., someone else disarmed it again, this time using the master code. In court, the prosecution painted a chilling picture of what happened that night. Their theory? Reeves had an unhealthy obsession with Stephen, and he saw Latrese as an obstacle, someone who needed to be eliminated, and the jury agreed. Robert Reeves was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But as disturbing as this case was, it's not the only time a pastor has committed the unthinkable. Robert Lee Harris. To everyone on the outside, Robert Lee Harris and his wife, Tanisha Harris, seemed like the perfect Christian couple. Robert was a respected church elder in Kansas City, Missouri, while Tanisha was both an associate.
Okay, we got another couple. Let's see what's going on.
pastor and a dedicated bank employee. They appeared to be loving, supportive, and deeply rooted in their faith. But behind closed doors, things were far from perfect. On January 8, 2018, around 4 p.m., police were called to an apartment in Overland Park, Kansas, responding to reports of a domestic disturbance. When they arrived, they found Robert Harris alone in the apartment. He told them everything was fine, so they left. But just a few hours later, Robert called them, this time to report his wife missing. The officers immediately felt something was off. Robert was acting strange, detached, unfazed, like he wasn't even concerned that his wife had vanished. And then there was the apartment itself. They noticed red stains on the carpet and shattered glass on the floor, clear signs that some kind of struggle had taken place. Something wasn't adding up. They returned later with a search warrant, and by then it was obvious Robert had tried to cover up whatever had happened. Furniture had been moved, and suspiciously, a rug that had been in the living room earlier was now tucked under the dining table. When officers lifted it, they found more red stains and even more broken glass. The pressure mounted, and eventually, Robert cracked. He confessed to being behind Tanisha's disappearance and led investigators to her body. Tanisha had been wrapped in a black garbage bag and dumped in a field 20 miles from their home. The autopsy confirmed what detectives already suspected. She had been strangled to death, and her body showed other signs of violent trauma. Not long after, police also found Tanisha's SUV abandoned just a mile away from their apartment. It was clear this wasn't just a missing persons case. This was cold-blooded murder.
This loss is profound and utterly indescribable.
Pastor Carlton Funderburk is today working to comfort his congregation at Preparers, Kansas City, as they mourn the death of 38-year-old Tanisha Harris. Police discovered her body overnight in this Raymore field, miles away from her home in Overland Park.
There's no way to even wrap one's mind around that, to even see that that would be in the realm of the possible. It doesn't seem real. It seems like a very bad nightmare.
Police tell 41 Action News officers initially went to Harris's apartment Monday afternoon after her husband called to report a disturbance. He was home alone at the time. Hours later, the husband once again called police, this time to report Harris missing. Officers say they became suspicious of the 30-year-old man after their interview. During further questioning, he admitted to police he had a role in his wife's disappearance.
To hear the news of this and there to be any allegation that he's involved makes the blow even all the more deep.
Funderburk recalls how Harris met the man she would eventually marry in July 2016.
They begin to correspond and begin to have conversation, and the embers of romance begin to bud, and so they had a long-distance relationship for quite some time. He relocated here primarily for her.
The newlyweds worked at the church where Harris was a minister and administrative assistant while he served as a church elder.
There was literally no sign that would indicate that there was any trouble.
As investigators dug deeper into the case, the pieces started falling into place, and what they uncovered was chilling. The morning of Tanisha's murder, Robert had made several trips to Walmart, picking up some very suspicious items: a garbage can, plastic bags, carpet cleaner, and a filleting knife. Meanwhile, Tanisha's murder was estimated to have happened around 2 p.m., right when she had gone home from the bank on her lunch break. It didn't take long for police to arrest Robert and charge him with murder. The only thing they couldn't figure out? His motive. During Robert's preliminary hearing, prosecutors called up friends, family, and colleagues to testify. First up was Tanisha's mother. She knew something was wrong when her daughter didn't answer her calls.
I wonder what his motive was.
Completely out of character. Then, Robert's supervisor took the stand. She testified that Robert had skipped work that day, texting her around 9 a.m. to say he wouldn't be coming in because of a car accident. But according to official records, no such accident ever happened. Next, a neighbor from the apartment complex told the court that between 2 p.m. and 3:30 p.m., the time of Tanisha's murder, he heard loud noises coming from their unit. It was so disturbing that he immediately told the apartment manager, who then called the police. But the most shocking testimony came from a man named Stephen Jr. Stephen Jr. took the stand and dropped a bombshell. He claimed he had been in a romantic relationship with Robert. Not only that, but he believed their affair was the reason Tanisha was killed. According to Stephen, Robert had shown up at his house the day of the murder, just 1 hour after police had first visited his apartment. He was nervous, sweaty, and visibly shaken. At the time, Stephen didn't know that Robert had just dumped his wife's car in a parking lot, or that Tanisha was already dead. Later that night, Stephen Stephen went on Facebook Live to defend himself after people accused him of trying to ruin Robert's reputation. He didn't hold back. His tone was heated and aggressive, making it clear that he had already lost everything by coming forward, including his reputation. He made it clear that if anyone wanted to confront him, he was ready to fight.
I thought I was doing the right thing because I was inappropriate with Robert. I did have, so I thought I want justice for Tanisha just as well, because nobody can understand the way I feel. Because I'm thinking, before any report came out, I'm thinking this is my fault. So I done lost my house, I done lost my job, I done lost my car. But you don't know that. So let me make this very clear. Any nigga that pull up on me, ain't no hands catching. I ain't fighting no. I will swear to God, nigga.
To prove his side of the story, Stephen even posted screenshots of his text messages with Tanisha, showing that they were close friends. And honestly, that made the whole situation even more heartbreaking. But here's where it gets even messier.
You close friends with her, but you sleeping with her husband.
Stephen also claimed that Robert wasn't just cheating on Tanisha with him. He alleged that Robert had been secretly involved with multiple other men from their church, all while keeping up the appearance of a devoted husband in a straight marriage. Meanwhile, the jury found Robert guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole for 50 years. It turned out Robert Harris wasn't just a respected church elder. He was a calculated killer who thought he could get away with murder. But the truth always comes out, and while this case was shocking, the next one is just as chilling. A pastor who got drunk, murdered his wife, and buried her in their backyard.
Whoa.
Kenneth Hardin Jr. When Carrie Hardin married Kenneth, she truly believed he was a God-fearing man, someone who shared her faith, her love for ministry, and her passion for helping others. On the outside, they seemed like the perfect couple, raising 2 sons together and building a life centered around their beliefs. But after 14 years, something changed. Ken started drinking, a lot. His faith, once a cornerstone of their marriage, began to fade, and his behavior became more and more erratic. While Carrie stayed strong for their family, working as a nurse and raising their kids, those closest to them started to notice cracks in their relationship. The fights were becoming more frequent, and Ken's temper was getting worse. One of Carrie's friends even recalled a terrifying moment when Ken smashed through a bathroom window just to get to her, and then chased her down with a gun. Despite everything, Carrie stayed, hoping things would get better. Her mother later said she endured the abuse because she wanted to keep her family together.
She believed that he would stop, that he wouldn't really harm her.
But he never stopped. And on the night of August 19th, 2024, Ken's rage took a deadly turn. After a night of heavy drinking, the couple got into another argument in their home on Merlin Court in Fayetteville, Georgia. But this time, it escalated beyond anything before. In a blind fit of anger, Ken snapped. He grabbed a gun and shot his wife, and instead of calling for help, he did something even more disturbing. Panicked, Ken tried to get rid of Carrie's body, but when that didn't work, he buried her in a shallow grave in their own backyard, all while their 2 children slept inside the house, completely unaware of the nightmare unfolding just a few feet away. The next morning, August 20th, Ken carried on like nothing had happened. He got up, got dressed, and took his sons to school like any other day. But he was desperate. He knew what he had done, and he needed a way out. So he called his father and asked him to come to Georgia for a visit. To make sure he showed up, Ken even bought his plane ticket. When his dad arrived, Ken handed over everything, his bank accounts, his financial responsibilities, like he was setting up for a long-term escape. And then he dropped the bombshell. He admitted to killing Carrie, claimed it was self-defense, said he set her body on fire and was leaving town for good, and he expected his father to just go along with it, maybe send him money when he needed it, keep the secret, and let him disappear. But that's not what happened. Instead of covering for him, Ken's father did the right thing. He called the police immediately and told them everything. By 11 a.m. on August 20th, 2024, dozens of officers from the Fayetteville County Sheriff's Office swarmed the Hardin home. Inside, they found a house in complete disarray, clear signs that someone had tried to clean up a crime scene. It was a massive property, 7,000 square feet, making the search even more difficult. So they brought in a cadaver dog, and after hours of searching, the dog led them to the backyard. And that's when they found Carrie. She had been buried in a shallow grave, her remains partially burned and covered with yard debris. It was clear that Ken had tried to get rid of her, but he didn't do a good enough job. Meanwhile, Ken was on the run, but he didn't get far. He was tracked down to a motel in Louisiana, where a SWAT team moved in and took him into custody. And when they finally had him, Ken didn't hold back. He cooperated fully, admitting that the whole thing started as a drunken argument that escalated into violence. But investigators quickly realized this wasn't just about alcohol. Ken had been spiraling struggling for a while. His once strong faith was slipping, his frustration was growing, and his anger was getting harder to control. That night, everything boiled over, and here's the really chilling part. Ken never planned to take responsibility. Investigators discovered he had been considering suicide by cop if he got caught. He was even heavily armed, but for whatever reason, when it came down to it, he backed out. The entire community was shaken. Neighbors who once saw the Hardens as a loving, church-going family were now left reeling.
So he can kill her, but he can't kill himself.
Sheriff Barry Babb says in his almost 40 years of law enforcement experience, this is one of the more grisly crimes he's had to work. But thanks to quick work and coordination with other agencies, they were able to catch this suspect, even though he'd fled all the way to Louisiana.
It's shocking as hell. Definitely seemed like something that would be on like on one of those shows. I didn't expect that. He seemed like a cool dude. Like I said, he had a fireworks show down here for the kids before the 4th of July.
Fayette County Sheriff Barry Babb says Hardin shot and killed his wife, 39-year-old Carrie Hardin, early Tuesday morning while his children slept.
So they went to school on Tuesday, never seen their mother.
The sheriff's office says it learned of the crime after Hardin flew his father into town and gave him his last will and testament.
He had told his father that he had shot his wife, and pretty much that he was now going to be on the run.
Hardin's father called the sheriff's office, who began investigating. Babb says a license plate reader helped them track Hardin's car to a motel in Louisiana. A SWAT team there moved to take him into custody while they searched the large property for his wife's body.
I got almost basically two
Daddy said he ain't gonna be involved in that.
calls at the same time that the cadaver dog located our victim, which was buried in a very shallow grave on the back part of the property, and at the same time that the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office took him into custody without incident.
Sheriff Babb says the body was partially burned. He says Fayette County investigators got on the first flight to Louisiana Thursday morning, where they've apparently had no trouble interviewing Hardin.
He is completely cooperating to the point that I will tell you that Captain Lee, who has been an investigator at least 3 decades, said I've never had a homicide suspect want to tell us everything.
Carrie's co-workers, patients, and fellow nurses were devastated. They had lost someone who dedicated her life to helping others. Vigils were held, and a memorial service was organized at the church where Ken himself used to preach. Carrie's family was destroyed. Her 2 sons, now without their mother, were placed in the care of relatives as they tried to process not only their loss, but the horrifying reality that their own father was the one who took her life. Meanwhile, Ken was extradited back to Georgia to face charges of murder, tampering with evidence, and other related crimes. His arraignment took place on September 2nd, 2024, at the Fayetteville County Courthouse. The courtroom was packed. On one side, Carrie's family sat in silence, visibly emotional as the details of her murder were read aloud. On the other, Ken sat quietly, showing almost no emotion. He didn't fight the charges, and it became clear that his legal team would be pursuing a defense based on diminished capacity or temporary insanity. He had admitted to the crime, but the question now was whether his mental state at the time of the murder would impact his fate. By the end of the hearing, Ken was denied bail and ordered to remain in custody while awaiting trial. So what do you think about these cases? Do you believe these so-called men of God got what they deserved?
They hate you. You're gonna die. I don't want to do this.